Virginia Governor Abigail Spanberger, who ran as a moderate Democrat, has turned out to be a full-blown race communist. She just established a new bill that mandates 42% of all government contracts go to SWaM businesses. That is small, women-owned, and minority-owned. The same bill bars white men from bidding on any state contracts under $100,000. DEI continues to thrive under Democrat state leadership, even under a Republican administration.
Congrats, VCU! Go Rams! What a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful way to start March Madness. So Virginia fans, I hope you are enjoying all of our Virginia teams that are in the tournament, and certainly VCU kicked it off really well with their success.
Any insight on the budget? If it comes down to VCU and UVA, who do you got?
I did put out my bracket. In my bracket, I did go with some of the historical results back in 2019 when UVA won. So in the end, my bracket put UVA to win the Mets. But let's be very clear, I'd be delighted if it's VCU.
Thank you so much.
Let's be real for a second. Something feels off, and a lot of people in Virginia are starting to notice it. You got voters out there dealing with what looks like a lot of buyer's remorse, and it centers around Governor Abigail Spanberger. Now, during the campaign, she presented herself as a moderate, someone reasonable, someone balanced, the kind of candidate who says, hey, I'm not extreme, I'm focused on common sense solutions. And for a lot of voters, especially in a state like Virginia, that tends to lean more in the middle. That message matters. It's the difference between winning and losing. But here's where things start not to add up. Because once she got into office, what people are seeing doesn't match what they were sold. And that's where the frustration is coming from. From my perspective, this isn't just about one policy or one decision. It's about a pattern. You're seeing moves towards higher taxes, softer approaches to crime, more leniency when it comes to illegal immigration, and stronger pushes for gun restrictions. And for voters who thought they were getting a moderate, this feels like a completely different direction. Think about it like this. Imagine you hire somebody for a job because they tell you they're going to run things one way, and the moment they get in, they flip the script and go in the opposite direction. You feel misled. That's what this looks like to a lot of people right now. And the bigger issue here is that this isn't new. This has kind of become a playbook, especially in swing states or states that aren't deeply red or deeply blue. Candidates campaign in the middle. They talk about balance. They talk about law and order, responsible spending, border security. They say the things that resonate with everyday people who just want stability. But then once they're in power, the policies start looking a lot more progressive than what was advertised. We saw a version of this at the national level too. Joe Biden was marketed as a moderate. That was the pitch. Calm things down, bring people together, stay centered. But in practice, what we got was one of the more progressive agendas we've seen in a long time. And whether you agree with these policies or those policies or not, the disconnect between the campaign message and the government or the governing reality is what stands out. Now, bring that back to Virginia, right? Because this is where it becomes real for people. This isn't just political theory. This is everyday life. When policies shift towards being softer on crime, that shows up in communities. When enforcement around immigration changes, that has real consequences, especially when local and federal agencies aren't on the same page. One example people keep pointing out is to sanctuary style policies. From my perspective, the concern here isn't complicated. It's about whether laws are being enforced, consistently enforced, and whether public safety is being prioritized. And when incidents happen, serious ones, and the response from leadership is to shift blame instead of addressing a real issue, that's when people start to lose trust, because at the end of the day, most voters aren't looking for perfection. They're looking for honesty and consistency. And if you say you're going to govern one way, they expect you to at least try to follow through on that. And when that doesn't happen, when the gap between what was promised and what's delivered gets too wide, people start asking questions and they start paying closer attention. And that's exactly what's happening right now. This situation in Virginia isn't just about one governor. It's about a broader pattern that a lot of people across the country are starting to recognize. And whether you agree with that perspective or not, you can't ignore the fact that voters are reacting to what they're experiencing in real time. Hit the like button, share the video, subscribe to the channel, and I want you guys to check this out.
Abigail Spanberger is under some growing pressure to honor ICE detainers. This as her state of Virginia reels from a string of murders tied to illegal immigrants. That includes an illegal immigrant from Guatemala charged with killing his 3-month-old daughter. Another Guatemalan immigrant who entered the country as a godaway is charged with stabbing a man to death. And an illegal immigrant from Sierra Leone with more than 24 prior arrests is charged with fatally stabbing a woman at a bus stop. Paul Morrow is here with us now. Here's what she said on February 4th, just after she got inaugurated, about ICE.
On the first day in office, I repealed and pulled back from what had been my predecessor's Executive Order 47, which mandated the work of Virginia state law enforcement agencies with ICE. Taking Virginia law enforcement state agency personnel and basically giving them over to ICE is something that ends today.
How's that worked out?
Yeah, not too well, quite obviously. Look, nobody can be surprised by this. This has been the tenor of things, particularly in Fairfax County. Let's expand the footprint here a little bit. You have the DA there for Fairfax County, a guy named Steve Descano, who ran on being soft on crime.
I want to show you something. I was in Culpeper. Governor Abigail Spanberger happened to be there too. So after her housing event, I went up to her and I asked her a question. I want to show it to you. I want to show you her response to that question, and I want to get your reaction. Are you ready?
Yes.
Hey, Governor. Welcome to Culpeper. Governor, what is your message to Stephanie Mentor's family? What is your message to Stephanie Mentor's family and children who have been harmed by illegal immigrants, Governor?
My question would be why, when there was a potential deportation order, ICE did not deport them.
ICE had them in custody for 700 days, Governor.
Thank you,
and an immigration judge would not allow him to be deported to Sierra Leone.
So that is it. And then the governor drives away. What do you think of her answer, her message to you and your family?
I think she is. Does she not know that ICE did everything they could to hold him and get him out of here? Does she not know that? She's governor. She should know that. ICE did their job. They could only hold them so many days. But she's trying to blame ICE, when she should be letting ICE get these people out.
The governor of Virginia, Abigail Spanberger, doesn't want to cooperate with ICE and let him be deported.
But he broke the law.
He sure did. But we think that illegal immigrants make Virginia a better place. I'm being a little facetious. But yeah, I agree with you. I mean, this guy, he's an illegal criminal pedophile. What do you think about that?
I think he should be deported. He broke the law.
Why isn't the governor of Virginia cooperating with ICE?
You are asking me that?
In your opinion?
Ask her.
Yeah,
in my opinion, because she's not looking at the facts. He's holy
He's got to go.
Broke the law. Again, number 2. So he needs to go. He needs to leave, or else he could do this again to someone else.
And he did do it again. So the first time he was arrested for public masturbation, they let him out of jail, knowing that he was an illegal criminal. And then he did it again. He used video game money, gave it to little kids for content, for sexual content back. And now he's in jail again, but they won't let him deport him.
That is horrific. Who the hell is running this state? Because we needed to have a one-on-one conversation.
Does this endanger Virginians?
Hell yeah. I just moved here.
Yeah, and this is where it starts to get real, because this isn't happening years down the line. This is happening right after she got into office. That's what makes it stand out. You got a governor who just stepped in, and already there's a noticeable shift in how voters are reacting. There's a new poll coming out, and what it shows is pretty straightforward. A lot of people in Virginia are not happy with the direction things are going. From my perspective, this looks like early stage voters' remorse, and not the quiet kind either. This is people openly saying this isn't what we signed up for. Think about what that means in real life. These are people who went to the polls, made a decision based on how a candidate presented themselves, and then they're looking around at policies and outcomes, at the overall direction of the state, and they're realizing something doesn't match. That's not a small thing. That's frustration turning into pushback. And honestly, this kind of reaction tells you something important. It shows that people are paying attention. It shows that voters aren't just locked into one mindset forever. They compare, they notice differences, and when things start to feel worse or less stable, they respond to that. Now, here's the broader pattern I've been pointing out. And in this situation, it fits almost perfectly. When Republicans are in office, a lot of the time things feel steady enough that people don't really think about it. There's no constant pressure, no sudden shifts that affect everyday life in obvious ways. So some voters start to take that for granted. They think maybe it doesn't matter as much who is in charge, but then leadership changes, policies shift, and suddenly those differences become very clear. We start seeing changes in how crime is handled, how money is being spent, how laws are enforced, and for a lot of people, it hits all at once. It's like flipping a switch. Think about a family trying to manage their budget. If taxes go up or costs increase because of new policies, that's not abstract. That's groceries, rent, gas. That's real pressure. Or think about safety. If there's a perception that enforcement is getting weaker, even slightly, people feel that in their day to day lives. It changes how comfortable they are in their own neighborhoods. So when you see voters in a state like Virginia start to push back this quickly, it tells you the impact is noticeable. It's not subtle. It's not something you have to dig into policy papers to understand. People are feeling it directly. And from my perspective, what's happening here is exactly what tends to happen when there's a gap between expectations and reality. The campaign messaging said one thing, the governing style is showing something else. And now voters are reacting to that different. They are not waiting years to figure it out. They are seeing it now. And whether you agree with that reaction or not, it's a signal. It's a signal that people are reassessing, comparing what they had before to what they have now, and making a judgment based on what they're experiencing in real life, in real time right now. And Governor Spanberger hasn't been in office that long. And in this case, that judgment doesn't look very positive. So with that being said, let's actually get into the details of what's driving this reaction, because once you see the specifics, it starts to make a lot more sense why people are responding the way they are.
And I think the real challenge is there's a lot of people who've, never met a trans person, whether they're a trans youth or an adult. And so there's a real effort to engage in some level of fear mongering. And, I really do believe that we should, as a society as a whole, demonstrate a fair amount of grace to people who are confused about, when we're talking about bathrooms or when we're talking about sports participation, like what are we talking about? And, I recognize, and I'm a parent, I've got 3 daughters in Virginia public schools. And so I understand the fact that there, may be confusion about, what is my opponent, as a very clear example, kind of threatening, and importantly, the willingness to fearmonger with or against kids who are trying to figure out who they are, who are in a challenging point in their life. Middle school and high school isn't easy for most people, let alone if you might be struggling with or trying to come to terms with your identity. And so just as a basic issue of principle, I do find it really objectionable that, that there would be kids who turn on the television and is in an effort to attack me, see, images of themselves sort of reflected as a villain.
No, this is where I think a lot of people start connecting the dots, and it's not complicated when you really break it down. From my perspective, what you're seeing here isn't surprising, even if it is frustrating for voters, because at this point, a lot of these situations follow a pattern, right? Candidates say what sounds reasonable during the campaign, and then once they're in office, the policies move in a very different direction, and people are sitting there like, "Wait, where did this come from?" But if you've been paying attention, this kind of what you expect. Now, let me explain this in a way that actually makes sense in real life. Trust matters, not just in politics, but in anything. If someone tells you one thing and then does another, you start questioning everything else they say. That's just normal. And when it comes to leadership, the gap becomes a serious problem, because now it's not just about one issue. It's about whether anything you're being told is actually real. And this is where certain topics become what I call a litmus test for voters. Because not because they're the only issues that matter, but because they reveal how willing someone is to be direct and honest about something that people can clearly see and understand. take the broader debate about fairness in sports and how policies are being handled there. From my perspective, a lot of voters look at that issue and think this should be straightforward. And when they hear answers that feel vague or like they're avoiding a question, that raises a red flag. Not just about that issue, but about everything else. Because the thinking goes like this: if a politician can't give a clear answer on something that feels basic and easy to explain, then how can you trust them on more complicated issues like the economy, public safety, or immigration? Think about how this plays out in everyday life. If you ask someone a simple, direct question and they keep dancing around it, changing the subject, or give you an answer that doesn't quite line up with reality, you're probably not going to take them at their word moving forward. You're going to be cautious. You're going to question their motives, and that's exactly what's happening with a lot of voters. It's not just about one policy or one statement. It's about a pattern of communication that feels unclear or inconsistent. Now, to be fair, people on the other side of this issue will say they're trying to balance inclusion and fairness, and that these are complex social questions that require careful handling. And that's a perspective that exists and is part of the broader conversation. But the frustration you're seeing from many voters come from the feeling that instead of clear answers, they're getting responses that avoid the core of the question. And when that happens repeatedly, trust starts to erode. Bringing this back to Virginia, this is why some voters are saying they should have seen it coming, because when a candidate struggles to give direct answers on certain issues during a campaign, it can be a signal. It can tell you how they might govern once they're in office. And in this case, from our perspective, a lot of people are now looking back and realizing those signs were there. They didn't just fully register at the time. And now the policies are being put in place and the direction is becoming clear. Voters are reassessing. They're asking themselves whether the message they heard during the campaign matches what they're seeing now. And for a growing number of people, the answer to that question is no. But I want you guys to see, because I feel as though this was the monumental moment where you should understand that she does word salad to the extreme highest, and you were never going to get a clear answer, as it seems, based on the patterns of how she answered questions, as you see in this clip. And then I want to show you guys in another clip.
Once again, the question was, should transgender girls who are biological males be allowed to use girls' bathrooms and play on girls' sports teams in K through 12? You have 15 seconds to clarify.
Can you tell us directly, do you support biological males who say they're women using women's locker rooms and bathrooms and competing in women's sports?
Well, the circumstance as this legal case plays out is really one of, we've had court cases settled or judged here in Virginia in the 4th District, the former Gavin Grimm case related to bathroom usage. And in fact, the argument is, the assessment is, there needs to be much clearer guidance in terms of what is an executive order's binding assessment of Title IX versus what has been a decision of a court.
But do you personally support these policies? Do you personally support them? Congresswoman, do you support these bathroom and locker room policies?
Thank you,
Why
Nick.
can't you answer these
Appreciate
questions
it, Nick.
directly? Hey, you're
Thank you.
touching me, I'm not touching you. Congresswoman, do you support these policies?
Let me get folks, everyone, folks get out of the way of the car. Thank you.
Do you support transgender women playing in girls' sports and being in girls' restrooms?
So in Virginia, we previously, until very recently, had a process in place where on an individual, one-by-one basis, schools, parents, principals, coaches were making decisions based on fairness, competitiveness, and safety, where a child might be able or might not be able to play in a particular sport. It was in place for 10 years. Over that time, there were roughly 40 kids who went through the process. Some were denied the ability to play the sport they wanted to play. Some were approved. But it was a process that involved parents, that involved coaches, that involved school districts, and people with knowledge of what is the particular sport, what is the age of the particular child. And I think that was a system that was working. And again, some kids were approved and some kids were denied based on competitiveness, fairness, and safety for all of our kids. Now, what you don't see my opponent talking about is her plan to actually lower costs, to address the issues that I am hearing about everywhere I go, from families, from parents. How do we ensure that we are lowering costs in healthcare, housing, and energy? And how do we ensure that we are contending with the very real issues facing our schools? Failing school infrastructure, issues recruiting and retaining teachers, and learning loss. Virginia is last in the country in our math recovery from COVID years. We're last and 51st after every other state and the District of Columbia. And so while I recognize all issues are important to all Virginians, I find it questionable that my opponent isn't talking about the issue that I know is number one, that everywhere I go people are talking about.
So,
can we go to Mason just real quickly?
But
give me our last question.
Just that same one. I just want to make sure that I actually understand. So if a bill landed on your desk and it had to do with restrooms or sports in this situation, I mean, would you support a bill that allowed this if it landed on your desk?
I would support a bill that would put clear provisions in place that provide a lot of local ability for input based on the age of children, based on the type of sport, based on competitiveness, because certainly I absolutely recognize I'm the mom of 3 daughters in Virginia public schools, and they participate in all activities across the board. I recognize the concern that families and community members might have about the safety of their own kids, about competitiveness, about fairness, and I think that what the process that was in place for 10 years was one that was working. It was one that took individual circumstances and individual communities into account, and I think that is the process that Virginia should continue to utilize.
Focusing on a K through 12 school system, should transgender girls who are biological males be allowed to use girls' bathrooms and play on girls' sports teams? You have 60 seconds.
I'm a mother of 3 daughters in Virginia public schools, and nothing is more important to me than their safety and their experience in schools. I'm also a former federal agent, and I work to investigate crimes against children. And so nothing is more important to me than the safety of all of our children. And that work, in part, has earned me the endorsement of Virginia's Police Benevolent Association.
Tell Steve
Ms. Earl Sears, Ms. Spanberger is talking. Please let her finish.
On issues related to what's happening in our schools in each individual community, I think it's important that we have parents and teachers and administrators making decisions about their individual schools, not politicians. And if we are talking about the safety of our children, I would ask why my opponent continues to support efforts to defund public safety, an effort carried on continually by this administration.
Ms. Spanberger, once again, the question was, should transgender girls who are biological males be allowed to use girls' bathrooms and play on girls' sports teams in K through 12? You have 15 seconds to clarify.
In cases across Virginia, I think it's incumbent upon parents and educators and administrators in each local community to make decisions locally.
That's what this is about.
Ms. Earl Sears?
There should never be nude men
oh
in
my
locker
goodness,
rooms.
we finally have her saying that, but you voted for that.
Ms. Earl
have
Sears.
You finally
my
Ms. Earl Sears, you are just
lying.
intruding on
Are
time
we in
here.
agreement
We're trying...
now? Are you
Ms.
going
Earl
to
Sears,
tell?
This is Ms. Spanberger's time. I have a follow-up question for Ms. Spanberger. Would you rescind the Youngkin administration policy requiring boys and girls to use bathrooms aligning with their biological sex? You have 30 seconds.
My priority would be to ensure that local communities, importantly parents and teachers and educators, are able to work together to meet the unique needs of each school and each community. And that is important. And I say that as a mother of 3 daughters in Virginia public schools.
Exactly.
And as someone who used to investigate crimes against children. The way that we keep our children safe is by ensuring they are safe in schools, which includes funding law enforcement and public safety.
But Ms. Spanberger, the question was, would you rescind the Youngkin administration policy requiring boys and girls to use bathrooms aligning with their biological sex? You have 15 seconds to clarify that question.
Yes.
And my answer is that in each local community, decisions should be made between parents and educators and teachers in each community. It shouldn't be dictated by politicians.
Are you going to change in a gym where men are nude in the locker rooms? Are you going to do that, Abigail?
Ms. Earl Sears.
I don't think you will. What about your girl children if they came home crying and said that there was a male in the locker room? What would you do? And that's why I'm asking my opponent, if your little girl comes home and said she was forced to undress in a locker room with a biological boy, what would you say? She's crying. What would you say? Would you? Are you not going to answer?
What do you
All right, so you guys got that. A lot of deflection. Kamala Harris, word style, word solid. And a lot of, oh, well, my opponent wants to talk about the trans situation, but what about the affordability? Well, if you listen to a person talk long enough, which was my point of showing that clip, is it's a pattern. And it hasn't just happened out of nowhere sporadically. It's been happening. And unfortunately, now people are realizing after the consequences now that she's in office. And I'm saying all that to say that if you listen to a person talk long enough, they will show you who they are. And this is how Abigail Spanberger been. That's the reality of it. So when she tried to deflect, but now it's coming back to bite her in the butt because the very thing she said that Winsome Sears wasn't talking about in the government debate of being governor, the governor debate of becoming governor as she became governor, as you guys see. Now she hasn't been taking care of affordability in the state of Virginia either, now that she's governor, as she claimed in her debate to be governor. So that's interesting. And I want you guys to check that out.
Troubling new poll numbers for Virginia Governor Abigail Spanberger. A new Washington Post SHAR poll finds she only has a 47% approval.
This makes Virginians more divided over Spanberger than any previous governor in recent history. Fox 5's Tisha Lewis joins us now from Fairfax with more on the uphill battle she's facing. Tisha, what can you tell us?
Mixed reaction from the crowd here outside Fairfax County election headquarters. In fact, that Washington SHAR poll that you just referenced has Governor Abigail Spanberger's disapproval rating at about 46%.
I think that she ran on a pretty moderate platform, but I think she's gone a lot farther left than a lot of people expected.
I still want to give her a chance to do things. Most of the things that I've seen so far have been done by the legislators and not so much her ideal. She hadn't had really the time to implement some of the affordability things that she talked about during the campaign.
I think she's new. I think her numbers will be going up. I think this is just a tricky time with the current situation between Republicans and Democrats and what's going on.
She's coping. She's coping with the reality and trying to make the best out of it, unfortunately. And this is where I'm going to bring it all together, because when you step back and look at the full picture, it starts to make a lot more sense. From my perspective, the biggest takeaway here is that the signs were there from the beginning. They weren't hidden. They weren't buried. They were right in the open if you were paying attention. And one of the clearest examples of that was how certain questions were handled during the campaign. Think about it. When voters ask direct, simple questions, especially on issues that people see as straightforward, the response wasn't always clear. It turned into long, roundabout answers that didn't really land anywhere. And when that happens, people notice. They might not act on it right away, but later on, when policies start rolling out and things don't line up with what they expected, they look back and realize those moments matter more than they thought. Now, let's talk about what that looks like in real life, because if someone avoids giving you a straight answer on one issue, especially one that feels easy to explain, it naturally raises questions about everything else, not just that topic, but the bigger picture, the economy, public safety, cost of living, all of it, because trust doesn't work in pieces. You either build it or you don't. And when people feel like they're getting mixed signals, that trust starts to fall apart. Now, to be fair, there are voters who prioritize different issues. Some people care more about affordability, healthcare, education, and they may feel those topics should take center stage. That's a real perspective, and it's a part of the broader conversation. But here's where the frustration comes in, because when leaders shift the conversation away from questions they don't want to answer, and then also don't deliver clear results on the issues they say matter most, like affordability, like lowering the cost of living, people start asking, what exactly are we getting here? Think about a family trying to make ends meet. If costs are still high, if nothing feels easier financially, and at the same time, there's a sense that leadership isn't being fully direct on other issues, that combination creates frustration fast. It blows my mind, because if Governor Abigail Spanberger, based on what she done, based on her actions and how she just roll out those lists of taxes, mind blowing to me. I think if she could tax air, she would, because she taxed. Basically, there's a walk your dog tax. I have never seen that in my life. It's mind blowing to me. So the overall, that's why I say she's coping. This woman right here in this on the screen. It's the overall feeling that things aren't improving and communication isn't clear, and that's where we are. Voters in Virginia are looking at what's happening, comparing it to what they were told, and making their own judgments.
I think she'll get better.
There you go. Meanwhile, we spoke with Virginia residents outside Fairfax County's election headquarters about Governor Spanberger's latest approval ratings. We're told her 47% approval rating is far lower than previous governors since the Washington Post polling in the 1990s. She's also reportedly lower than former Republican Governor Glenn Youngkin's 50% approval rating. George Mason University's Schar School of Policy and Government poll found 29% strongly approve of Spanberger's performance, while 38% strongly disapprove. Criticism over affordability, healthcare, housing, and immigration are front and center across the Commonwealth.
Spanberger ran on her record as a moderate, as a bipartisan spirit of bringing everyone together, Republicans and Democrats. And yet she has reluctantly been pulled into the redistricting, and that is changing a 6-5 split for the Democrats in congressional seats in Virginia to a 10-1 split favoring the Democrats, and that has made Republicans white hot with rage.
And like I'm saying, when it comes to Virginia and what we're seeing, what's happening, comparing it to what they were told and making their own judgments, they're realizing they should have looked closer at the warning signs. Others just now starting to question things as the impact becomes more visible in their daily lives. And that's how this plays out. It's not instant for everyone, but over time, reality catches up with expectations. And when it does, people adjust. They speak up. They change how they vote. They pay closer attention to the next time around. And at the end of the day, this isn't about one person. It's about a bigger lesson for voters anywhere. Pay attention to how candidates answer questions. Look at whether their message stays consistent. And most importantly, watch what they actually do once they're in office, because that's what affects your day-to-day life. If something doesn't line up, people are going to notice. And when enough people notice, you start to see exactly what we're seeing now, which is a shift in how voters respond after the fact. And this is the part that really brings it back down to reality, right? Because at the end of the day, this isn't complicated when you look at how government actually works. From my perspective, when you vote for a candidate, you're not just voting for that one person. You're voting for the agenda of the party behind them. That's how this plays out in real life. It's like a governor operates in a vacuum. They're working with a legislator, with a party, with a broader set of policies. They're all moving the same direction. So when you see lawmakers at the state level pushing certain bills, whether it's on taxes, spending, criminal justice, gun restrictions, that's not separate from the governor. That's all connected. Think about it like a team. If the whole team is moving one way, it's not an accident. It's the plan. When people say, I didn't expect this, the reality is this is exactly what that party has been pushing in other states too. You can look at places like California, New York, Illinois. Different states, same general direction when it comes to policy. Higher spending, more regulations, softer approaches in certain areas of enforcement, stricter gun laws. That pattern is already established. So when similar ideas start showing up in Virginia, it shouldn't be surprising. It's consistent with the broader agenda. Now, bring that down to everyday life again. If you're a small business owner and regulations increase, you feel that immediately. If you're a homeowner and taxes go up, you feel that. If you're someone concerned about safety and you see policies that seem to reduce enforcement, you notice that too. These aren't abstract political debates. These are day-to-day impacts. And that's why it matters who's in charge at every level, not just the top position, because the policies coming out of the legislator, the ones being proposed, that were supported and passed, that's the direction your state is going to move in. And from my perspective, what we're seeing in Virginia right now lines up exactly with that. The governor's positions, the legislator's priorities is all part of the same track. So when voters say they're surprised by how far things have shifted, the reality is that this is what comes with being part of that party in control. It's not one decision, it's a full package. And once that package is in place, the results start to show up pretty quickly in people's everyday lives. Now, right here is what makes the situation stand out. You don't need to be a political expert to understand why. Think about how this usually works when a new governor or president comes into office. That's typically when their approval is at its highest. People are giving them the benefit of the doubt. They just won. That's some optimism, positivity, and they haven't had time to make a bunch of decisions that upset people yet. That's just the normal pattern. Approval starts high, and then over time, as policies roll out and real world effects kick in, it gradually goes down. That's expected. Then it goes almost. Then that's how it goes almost every time. But what we're seeing here is different. From my perspective, when approval starts dropping this early, especially dipping below that 50% range right out the gate. That's not normal. That's a signal. That tells you something is off. That tells you people aren't just mildly disagreeing here and there. They're reacting quickly and noticeably to what they are seeing. And if you think about it real terms, when you hire somebody new at work, you usually just give them some time to settle in. You don't judge them on day one. But if within the first few weeks, people already start saying this isn't working, that's a problem. That means the issues are obvious enough that they can't be ignored. And that's what it looks like with these approval numbers. It suggests that the direction of decisions and the overall approach is hitting people in a way that didn't expect and not in a good way. Now, from my perspective, a lot of this comes back to the policies we've been talking about. When voters feel like things are moving too far left, too fast, especially in a direction they didn't sign up for, they respond they respond quickly. When whether it's concerns about cost of living, public safety, or government overreach, once those concerns become real in everyday life, approval numbers reflect that. Now, to be fair, there are always going to be people who support these policies and believe they are the right direction. That's part of any political system. But what stands out here is how broad the reaction seems to be and how fast it's happening. And that's what's making it significant, because early approval is usually the easiest approval you're going to get. If you're struggling there, it's only going to get harder as time goes on. And that's why, from my perspective, this is being looked at as a warning sign, not just for Virginia, but as an example of how voters respond when there's a gap between expectations and reality. The other piece of this, and this is just being honest about how people operate, is that sometimes voters don't realize what a certain direction looks like until they experience it. It's one thing to hear campaign promises. It's another thing to live under the policies they follow. And once that shift happens, people make up their minds pretty quickly. And that's what we're seeing here. It doesn't take years. It doesn't take decades. In a lot of cases, it only takes a short period of time for people to say, yeah, this isn't what we want. And when that realization hits, the reaction tends to show up fast. And that's exactly what these numbers are reflecting right now.
It suggests some disillusionment on the part of people who were willing initially to give her a shot. And I think a lot of it has to do with, is she a moderate? Is she part of the more progressive part of the Democratic Party?
And here's where this could really start to backfire in a way a lot of people aren't even thinking about yet. Because if you got approval ratings dropping this early heading into something like the midterms, that creates a real problem when you start talking about redistricting. Now, let's break that down in plain English, because this can sound complicated, but it's actually pretty simple when you look at how it plays out. Redistricting, or what a lot of people call gerrymandering, is basically when districts get redrawn in a way that's supposed to give one party an advantage. And the idea is you take areas where you think you got enough support and you try to spread those voters out just enough to win more districts. So instead of having a fewer super strong districts, you try to create more winnable ones, and that's the strategy. But here's the catch. This is where it gets risky. That strategy only works if those voters actually stay loyal. If you're counting on swing voters, people who aren't locked in onto one party, and they start getting frustrated, they can flip. And when they flip, the whole plan falls apart. Think about it like this. Imagine you're trying to balance something very carefully and you spread your weight too thin. It works as long as everything stays stable. But the moment things shift even a little bit, the whole thing tips over. That's what can happen here. If Democrats in Virginia are assuming that these swing voters are going to stick with them, but those same voters are already seeing signs of frustration, right? And with the current leadership, that's a problem, because now instead of gaining ground, they could actually lose it. You can end up with districts that were supposed to lean blue suddenly going red. And at the same time, the solid blue districts that were thinned out to make the strategy work are no longer as strong as they used to be. And that's how it backfires. And from my perspective, the warning signs are already there. If voters are this unhappy this early, that tells you those swing voters are not locked in, and they're paying attention, they're reacting, they're willing to change their vote based on what they're experiencing right now. That's a big deal, because elections aren't won on guarantees. They're won on momentum and perception. And right now, the perception for a lot of voters in Virginia seems to be shifting in a negative direction. Now, step back and look at the bigger picture. This isn't just about one state. This is the kind of thing that parties look at nationwide. They watch how voters respond in places like Virginia, because it can signal what might happen in other swing areas. And from my perspective, what this is showing is that when policies move too far away from what voters were expecting, especially in moderate leaning areas, there's pushback. And that pushback can happen fast. And the other piece here is timing. The fact that voters are reacting this early actually matters, because it gives them time to adjust before the next election. It's not like this is happening at the very end of a term where there's no room to respond. This is happening up front, which means it can shape how campaigns are run, what issues are focused on, and ultimately how people vote when it counts. And like I said earlier, sometimes voters need to see things play out in a real life before they make that shift. It's one thing to hear promises, and it's another thing to live with the results. But once that shift happens, it doesn't usually take long for people to decide how they feel about it. And that's what this looks like. It looks like voters getting that real world experience, making up their minds, and starting to push back. And from my perspective, if that trend continues to have a real impact, not just in Virginia, but in how both parties approach these midterm elections moving forward.
Despite that 47% approval rating, the new poll also indicates that 8 out of 10 Democrats approve of Governor Spanberger's performance, while 9 out of 10 Republicans disapprove. Meanwhile, we also reached out to Governor Abigail Spanberger's office, and we are awaiting their response.
And this is where it really comes down to something simple, right? Action. That's what it comes down to. Because you could talk about policies all day. You could break down what's happening. You could point out the patterns. But at the end of the day, none of it changes unless people actually show up and vote. That's just the reality of it. From my perspective, if you're someone who looks at what's happening in a place like Virginia and you don't like it, the takeaway shouldn't just be frustration. It should be motivation. Because here, what this actually looks like in real life. The people who are the most energized, the most consistent about showing up, they are the ones who shape the outcome every time. It doesn't matter what the polls say. It doesn't matter what people say online. It comes to who actually goes out and votes when it counts. And historically, one thing that's been true is that Democrats tend to stay very engaged, especially in midterms and local elections. They show up. So if the other side is sitting back thinking someone else will handle it, or it's not that big of a deal, that's how you end up with outcomes that don't reflect what a lot of people actually want. Think about it like this. If you don't participate, you're basically letting other people make decisions for you. Decisions about taxes, about schools, about public safety, about your day-to-day life. And then later on, when those decisions start affecting you, that's when people say, wait, how did we get here? Well, this is how. By not being involved when it mattered. Now bring it back to Virginia. What you're seeing there is an example of what happens when leadership goes in a direction that a lot of voters didn't fully expect. And now there's frustration after the fact. But the bigger lesson is that it's a lot easier to prevent something than it is to fix it later. Waiting until things get bad enough to force a reaction isn't a great strategy. Being proactive is, paying attention early is, voting consistently is. And from my perspective, that's the mindset shift that has to happen. Not reacting after the fact, but staying engaged the whole time. Because again, the other side is not sitting this out. They're organized, they're motivated, and they're showing up. So if you care about the direction of your state, your community, or your country as a whole, it really does come down to participation. It's not complicated, but it does require effort. And the truth is, you shouldn't have to experience policies you disagree with firsthand just to feel motivated to act. The motivation should come from understanding what's at stake before it gets to that point. That's how you stay ahead of it. That's how you avoid the cycle of frustration we're seeing playing out right now. At the end of the day, everybody's going to have their own views, their own priorities, and their own decision to make when they step into that voting booth. But if there's one thing the situation highlights is that those decisions matter a lot more than people sometimes think. So if you got an opinion on this, if you're looking at what's happening, you got to take, go ahead and share it. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. If you're following this kind of content, make sure you like, comment, and subscribe so we can keep having these conversations. On that next, spread that peace, love, and positivity, family. Catch you in the next one. Peace.